there. Hey, Bashar.
Good day. Good day.
First of all, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you and Daryl for doing all the work that you are doing.
Our passion and our pleasure.
I have a few topics, so let's just dive right into it. First, I want to ask you questions about, more about yourself and the Sasani.
Yes.
I know that you followed in the footsteps of your father, right, to become a contact specialist.
Yes.
What drove you to do that, and what other sort of career paths or life paths are available on your planet?
Well, many. I am also a sculptor. That's part of passion, expression. An explorer in general, in pure form. That's also part of my passion. And there are many other kinds of artistic or exploratory endeavors or encounters that can be had. Some people are directly, literally, living among other civilizations that are not our own to learn from them in a variety of ways. In the same way that you might visit a different country and live among the people there to pick up on and understand more clearly their ways of doing things, their expression of creation. There are many things that we can do.
Gotcha. So it's all really driven by sort of whatever is exciting, whatever is creative.
Whatever is the key frequency of our being at any given moment, yes.
You've channeled for over 30 Earth years through Daryl, and what's been your experience of that passage of time? Is it same length, or is it more sort of compressed?
It's much more compressed. A conversation we may have with you today, and a conversation we may have with you a year from now in your time, may actually, from our perspective, be back to back. It just depends on what is necessary for our understanding of the content of the conversation. Sometimes there may be a need to understand that time has passed in your experience. Sometimes there may be no need for that at all.
Interesting. Okay. And then how many other, contact specialists are in contact with people on Earth right now?
It fluctuates, but the average is around 150 from our civilization.
Oh, wow. And there's others from the IL and other civilizations as well.
Yes.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay, so on your planet, you had the Shikana experience, right?
Yes.
And before that experience, what was the civilization like? Like, for example, did you have money? Like, what was life like?
We've never really had money. We had much more of a head start evolutionarily than you have. But the idea is that we still had the experience of negativity. We still had some experience of disease and separation and so on and so forth. But we got to a point where the scales were tipped by the majority of the energy focusing in a more positive direction, which then brought about the reflection of the Shikana experience for all, who at least were open and willing to experience it that way. Those that did not, those that had another path, instantly disappeared from our civilization.
When you say instantly disappeared, what do you mean by that?
They shifted to another reality where we could no longer perceive them.
I see. Gotcha. Fascinating. Okay. Well, I guess on that thread, let's talk about the Earth's transition that we're in right now. So it's really exciting to hear there's going to be more crafts and things like that.
Yes.
Are there any particular places you'd recommend people gather or go to?
Wherever you are attracted to, although we have already said that Joshua Tree area is very important energetically as a vortex that has to do with the crossing and passage of many different civilizations, or let's just say it's a major traffic line.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so what about sort of the role of technology on Earth? So right now we have tools like this that allow us to create sort of a shared connection and empathy, but we have also other technology that creates more separation.
Yes.
So is it better for us to use these tools as sort of a stepping stone to build that ability for intuitive connection? Or is it better just drop whole technology and just focus on those more intuitive...
Different people will do it in different ways. There's no one right way to do it. Different people will do it in different ways. Depends on how they relate to the idea.
Gotcha. Okay. And then we're also dealing with climate change. And you mentioned previously that spreading particles of gold is sort of one method. Why is that something that would actually help?
Because it reflects the idea of sunlight back out into space and lowers the temperature of the planet.
Gotcha.
And it's also inert and lasts essentially forever. It doesn't decay.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And so is that the same reason that the Anu people originally came to Earth?
Yes.
Were they also dealing with that sort of similar style of climate change?
Even worse.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. Okay, so another topic, parallel incarnation. So you've shared that there are souls and then oversouls and then oversouls and so on.
Yes.
But at the same time, we have the ability to connect to any sort of parallel incarnation that's ever been in existence.
That is relevant for you to connect to, not anything.
Oh,
If
interesting.
it's not relevant, you won't connect to it, because why should you if it's not relevant?
Yeah. And so do you have like a limited number of souls as a part of your own oversoul?
Well, the entire population of our planet is much lower than yours. On average, it remains relatively stable, give or take, around 300 million.
Okay.
So, in a sense, we generally, with a few exceptions for a variety of reasons, sort of all relate to a single oversoul for our civilization.
And so for humans, is it similar? Is it more like 7 per oversoul than eventually the human oversoul?
The idea of the 7 billion people on your planet is generally representative, even though this also fluctuates, of between about 300 to 500,000 oversouls.
Interesting. Okay. And now, let's say
That's not evenly divided.
Yeah.
You can't just say, well, it's X per oversoul. It constantly fluctuates, but that's the average.
Now, you've also shared in the past that there are these parallel incarnation charts, right, that tell you
The pin charts, yes.
the pin charts. So does that mean that one soul, or rather one oversoul, has multiple incarnations at different timelines?
Yes. Usually that's the case. Some pin charts may be adventurous enough to go into more than one oversoul, but generally that's not the case.
Okay, gotcha. Let's talk about the formula. So I know you've shared a lot about this. You may have already shared this particular aspect of it, but one question that I've had is, sometimes it's hard to tell if there is an excitement, if there's other work that needs to be done that may not be as exciting, right?
Then you are either making it not exciting or it really isn't your way. There's always another way. If the work really needs to be done, there's always an exciting way. If it really isn't part of your excitement, then that work may not need to be done and something else may take its place. So again, the first thing to always check is, am I dampening the excitement because of my belief systems? Once you've cleared that through yourself and you realize you're not the one preventing yourself from being excited because you might be doing it in a way that is not exciting for you, you might have certain beliefs about what would happen if you did go forward, and so on and so forth. Once you clear all that out of the way, if the excitement is naturally waning, then that's synchronicity telling you, go in another direction. Go in the exciting direction, even if it looks like it's not connected. What is most passionate for you at this moment tells you it's connected, even if it doesn't look like it could be connected on the surface. It's the thread of excitement that tells you it's connected.
Gotcha. Okay. Then let's talk about the 5 laws. So you shared that everything is in the here and now, and that the past actually extends from the now.
Yes.
So you've also shared that it's possible to technically change the past that you're connected to.
Well,
does that
yes.
mean that
It happens automatically.
Yeah, okay, so does that mean that if somebody had a traumatic experience and they believe that they never did, or are they now connecting to another version of themselves that never did? And if so, is that a way of bypassing that sort of experience?
Well, yes, in a sense. But the thing of it is it can't be used, in a sense, as a denial mechanism. It actually has to be truly an understanding that you are truly a different person and that the so-called other past has nothing to do with who you are now. It can't just be used as a denial or a glossing over mechanism. Oh, well, I'm different, so now I have to pay attention to the fact that I'm still creating all these negative beliefs based on the idea of an experience that happened in childhood. Can't be that. Can't ignore what you're creating in the moment. But if you're truly changing, this is what we often refer to as the 13th step. you really have a deep experiential understanding that you are a new person. And many times when you really understand and experience that you are a new person, though there may be some reasons to still refer to the past belonging to the other person that quote unquote you used to be, very often when you really are a new person, there's nothing to remember because it doesn't relate to you anymore.
That's gonna be my next question. So if you are truly that new person, you don't even remember being that old person.
In many cases, correct.
And so in a way, as you're growing, you may not even be aware that you're growing.
Well, you'll be aware in some sense, but it may not be that way. You'll always have some sense of measure of change, but it may not be that particular technique that you use.
Interesting. Okay, that's very fascinating. And then my last question is, when folks are doing meditation, when they're doing something like Vipassana, we're able to get into these more expanded states of being.
Yes.
What exactly is that? And then,
what do you mean? What exactly is that? You're aligning with more of yourselves, more of the parallel realities, more of creation. You're expanding your consciousness to be more aware of the connections you already have. It's a meditation technique. It's a permission slip like anything else. Some people will find it valuable and some people will find other things.
Gotcha. Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good day.
Good day.
Hello, Bashar. This is Lorena from Slovenia. For the last 4 or 5 months, I've been having interactions with the Mantis beings. During your last transmission, Tell Them Bashar sent you, I got a download that I shall ask you a question, which is, how exactly am I participating in hybridization agenda? I would like to know that in words, because communicating with them, I do not understand always completely. And I would like to know how to be fully of service to those beings and how to be fully of myself. Thank you, Bashar. Goodbye.
You are serving in the hybridization agenda by having donated genetic material. You're serving in the hybrid agenda by teaching the hybrid children some of the things they need to know when they come to live among humans on Earth. They are attempting to get your attention to understand the purpose that you are providing for the evolution of humanity in general, though there may be some specific messages from time to time. But they are also sending to us a technique for you that may put you in clearer touch with the communications from the Mantis beings, and that is to draw them. And while you are drawing them, consider the drawing of them a type of meditation. And in that meditation, allow yourself to just open up to what you'll receive by looking at the drawing as you're creating it, and even looking at the drawing and meditating on it as you have finished the drawing. That's a technique that can work for you.
Hey Bashar, this is Michael from Tel Aviv, and I'm happy to connect with you. So my question is about shifting between beliefs. I find it very difficult to change what I believe is true. In other words, I believe one thing, and I recognize that I would prefer to believe something else that is more positive, that is more in alignment, that is more serving the reality that I would like to experience. And it just seems like the belief that I'm holding on to right now is way too strong, and I'm way too convinced about it, that the shift between the beliefs is almost not likely. So what is your suggestion as for shifting more easily between the beliefs that I'm holding now and the beliefs that I would like to believe are true? Thank you and good day.
You wouldn't know that they're in alignment with your higher self if you didn't have the capacity to shift to them easily. So the belief to work on is specifically the one that says that you are convinced that you are in some way, shape, or form finding it difficult to shift, because that is coming from a negative fear-based belief. So focus on why you give your power over to the very concept of being easily able to shift and unable to shift. That is where you will find your answers. Investigate the idea of what the negative belief is telling you about being unable to easily shift.
Hello, Tadeo.
Ania.
We have many, many questions from our viewers today.
All right.
The first question is about the idea of things like global conspiracies, shadow government, financial master plans, etc. The idea that government or financial powers that are secretly guiding everything in this long-term controlled way. Is there stuff like that actually going on that needs to be revealed and processed and sorted out? Or is it more of a conspiracy rabbit hole that some people go down, but not something that necessarily applies to collective consensus reality?
To some degree, some of the idea of these conspiracies does exist because people on your planet that are negatively oriented will attempt to dominate certain aspects of your society. But they are not necessarily to the degree that many people think. Many people, because of their fear-based beliefs, will blow this completely out of proportion, even though some of them are based in some degree of fact. But again, not to the degree that they may think. The idea, of course, in general, is that the greatest aspect of any such thing you might call a conspiracy is to get the people to believe that those that are behind the conspiracy actually have more power than they do. That is the first so-called principle of creating domination, is to make people believe that you're more powerful than you are, that you are more far-ranging than you have the capability of being. So if you diminish a lot of the conspiracies anywhere from 1/2 to about 1/3 of what you believe them to be, you will have a little bit more of an accurate assessment of the actual scope of any such endeavor. Although not all conspiracies exist, even though you may be made to believe that they do, but some do.
And what is the consequence of choosing to go down a rabbit hole where you focus so intensely on conspiracy theories and become so distrustful of any authority or governmental, body?
Well, we would think that would be clear. What you focus on, especially in the fear-based realities, will be what your reality becomes.
So in terms of the splitting prism and the different trains leaving the station, if you're strongly focused on conspiracy theories, what kind of a reality is that going to take you to? Is it going to put you on a train that is in a direction that you probably don't really prefer?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any suggestions for how individuals who have become enmeshed in conspiracy theories can liberate themselves from their fearful perspective?
They might be able to be told that they are being manipulated, they are being used, they are being, as you say, conned in many cases, but whether or not they choose to listen to those ideas is completely up to them. It may be possible that people that are too deeply involved in the idea of fear-based theories may not necessarily anymore have the ability to come out of them, but some of them might. It just depends on how they are approached. If they are approached with compassion and love, because they do perhaps in their mind have legitimate fears, but very often the legitimate fears that are being played upon by those that are attempting to manipulate them are not even really what they say the fears are. Usually the fears are much deeper and more basic than the things themselves that they believe to be true, that are false.
So it actually is about negative and positive beliefs. And sort of the idea that if you have a negative belief that's in your consciousness and you focus on it and you think that you can play with it without getting drawn too deeply into a negative vibration, is that correct, that at some point you will find that it's more and more difficult to escape the negative consequences of a negative belief that you're engaging with?
In general, yes. Any strongly held, continuously held belief system will create a kind of momentum or inertia that will make it more challenging eventually to change. That's the nature, again, of the belief, but primarily the negative ones, because the positive beliefs always contain an issue of freedom, an issue of ability to change, whereas the negative ones don't.
After we die, do we still have some of the same interests and desire to follow through with unresolved issues that we were working on in our life?
Yes, you can. But you can still make a decision as to how to go about that, when to go about that. So, yes, if you feel that there are things that were unresolved or not played out fully, you may choose a scenario in some way, shape, or form, whether physical or non-physical, in which to complete that scenario somehow, or at least create some experience that balances the idea of the energy out.
And if all that is positive, and half negative, and everything is made out of love, does that mean that negative is made of love as well?
Yes, of course, everything is. But remember, first of all, it is more like the idea of 51% positive and 49% negative, because the center point, the balance point, gives you still the chance to choose, the freedom to choose, and therefore you could say that existence is slightly bent in the positive direction. The idea, again, is for people to understand that everything is made of the vibration of existence, which you translate as unconditional love. Negative as a mechanism is not necessarily negative as an experience in the value judgment way of phrasing that, because you are using negative mechanisms to focus your consciousness to have a physical experience, which you have to do in order to experience the concept of physical reality, because you are a bigger being than that. So you do have to impose negative mechanical frameworks on your consciousness in order to limit your ability to perceive yourself as a greater being, at least temporarily. So by applying those negative frameworks, that's not necessarily for a negative reason, so to speak. So the idea primarily is to understand how to use these mechanisms, the positive, the negative, but in a way that always has a positive result, a positive effect, if that's what you prefer.
So in a sense, are those who have gone farther into the darkness eventually able to go farther into the light? And is there some benefit to having experienced a lot of suffering?
Well, there can be. Again, it depends on how you use things. Remember, it's not about what happens, it's about what you do with what happens. So those that have allowed themselves the opportunity to finally let go, no matter how far into darkness they've gone, can snap and spring very rapidly onto the side of light. But again, it depends on the theme that they're exploring. Of course, ultimately, when you go into spirit, you will realize these things, and therefore you will have more freedom to recognize why you chose what you chose and how to utilize it to propel yourself in the direction that you prefer. So the things that we're talking about here, not that positive and negative don't exist on every level, but they're experienced very differently as physical reality. And therefore, when you stop being physical, you do have a little bit more insight and a little bit more freedom, a broader range of point of view with which to examine and assess what you did in the physical reality. And therefore, you have more freedom to use it in the way that you prefer to.
And you've taught us that in order to clear a negative belief, we have to ask, what would I have to believe is true in order to feel this way?
Generally, yes. Or the alternative question, if I did in fact move forward in the way I say I prefer to, what am I afraid will happen? for most people on your planet, that will usually reveal the negative belief.
Okay. So, and actually the wording for what would I have to believe is true about myself in relation to this situation? Is it more like that?
That's the more precise way to phrase it. Because it's always in relation to what's going on.
So when you ask that question, does it put you in a specific state of mind that allows you to have an answer?
Yes, if you're willing to listen. That's why we sometimes suggest the alternative form of the question, because so many of you are so used to the idea of fear that you can use it to your advantage by simply admitting that you're afraid of something if you move forward. It will usually be a quicker and clearer way to recognize what the fear-based belief is, because you're asking for it specifically. What am I afraid of? And if you're honest and willing to listen, the answer will come.
So if the question it brings the answer of I don't feel worthy,
yes,
what is the antidote to that?
Well, again, it's understanding the nature of existence as we have described many times before. If you really truly were not worthy, you wouldn't exist, because there are no mistakes per se within creation. So by saying I'm not worthy, in a sense, paradoxically, that's actually quite arrogant, because you're saying I, out of all of the beings in existence, am the only one that is not worthy of my existence. Believe me, if you weren't worthy of existence, you would not exist. So what you're doing by saying I'm not worthy is you are arguing with existence itself about the idea that you exist. And you will never win that argument, because you can never cease to exist. So if you can understand the way we're describing this structurally, you can snap yourself out of that illusion that you're not worthy. And again, remember the paradox. You have to be worthy of your existence in order to create an experience of unworthiness.
So like one person here is saying that, they feel negative emotions and negative beliefs are something bad, and that there's something wrong with them, but they can't help they can't resist their negative beliefs.
Yes, they can. The idea that you can't resist your negative belief is a negative belief in and of itself. That's what you have to pay attention to, is that that's not a fact. When you say, I can't resist my negative belief, that's not a fact. That's the negative belief attempting to convince you that it's very difficult and very challenging to let it go, because that's one of the ways that negative and fear-based beliefs have of perpetuating themselves, because that's what all beliefs are designed to do. Because if you didn't buy into a belief as true, whether positive or negative, you couldn't have a physical reality experience. It's the depth of your belief in the belief that creates the physical reality experience. Therefore, beliefs reinforce themselves with emotions, with thoughts, with behaviors and reflections of experience to make themselves seem like facts. But when you really listen and say, I just can't change this, I just can't resist my negative belief, you're not stating a fact, you're parroting the negative belief, who is designed to make sure you don't let it go. So no matter what comes out of your mouth, no matter what goes through your mind, those thoughts are not facts, and you have to pay attention to that idea and see through the smoke and mirrors. No matter how real, no matter how challenging, no matter how difficult it may seem, you are simply buying into a belief, and beliefs can be changed.
And if you feel like, I want to eliminate this, I'm stuck, it's like the idea of rejecting the negative belief. What is the appropriate way to reject a negative belief without, in a sense, getting caught up in it?
Don't reject it. You accept that it's there. You own it. And you say, I must be doing this for a reason. What could the reason be? Let's see. It could be as simple as recognizing that I don't prefer this. And therefore, what do I prefer? And you can recognize it's just as easy to choose what you do prefer as it was to choose what you don't prefer, because again, they're all just belief systems. And therefore, you have to allow yourself to not pay attention to the idea that changing your belief is more difficult than anything else. That's just another belief system.
They're as easy to change as tissue paper, right?
Yes, because that's all they're made of.
And so as our consciousness and technology continues to evolve, will it get to the point where we can casually receive higher level insights and answers reflected from our higher selves just as easily as we might Google something and get the answer on the internet?
Yes, because as we say, this is one of the reasons why we suggest that you follow the formula that we've shared with all of you. Because when you act on your passion, what happens? You raise your vibration. When you raise your vibration, what happens? You become a better receiver and a better antenna for higher frequency information, and therefore you will get what you need. Remember, you cannot experience what you're not the vibration of. This is just physics. And conversely, you cannot experience the idea of anything different than the vibration you actually are. So if you raise your vibration, you can only really truly experience the things that are germane for that level of frequency. And if suddenly you start experiencing something that is below that level, it doesn't mean that you're still on that level. It means you've changed your frequency and lowered it so that you're now receiving something that perhaps you don't prefer. You have to realize it's simply not physically possible to receive information that is not the equivalent of the frequency that you're on.
And can you speak about the potential to course correct in our physical reality experience? Because you've often talked about missing an appointment, and if you miss an appointment, is everything thrown off, or does it course correct?
Not necessarily. You have many, many opportunities to course correct, and that's what life guides you through. In other words, when you get a reflection of something you don't prefer, that's an opportunity for course correction, because you can examine it, you can see it, you can find the belief that generated it, and you can change it, and that's course correction. Another format of course correction are the two positive modes of synchronicity that happen automatically when you're acting on your passion. Everything is synchronicity. There is true negative synchronicity, which spirals you downward and is the product of your fear-based beliefs. But there is also what we now are calling a traffic light version of synchronicity, where there is a synchronicity that is the green light that says, here's an opportunity that you are able to move forward on, so please act on it. And there is the red light synchronicity that says, right now, this is not the step for you. We will not allow you to be able to go further with this. And that should be your guiding mechanism to understand that that's not correct right now. As long as you're not the one dampening the excitement, if it's naturally waning, that's the red light synchronicity saying, stop, this isn't your path. Go follow what you can act on. Maybe you'll come back to this, maybe you won't, but it doesn't matter. Because as long as you follow the green light version of synchronicity and act on the things that you are capable of acting on that are representative of your passion, it will be the same as traveling through your city in a safe way, because you will move through the green lights and you will stop at the red ones, and you will know then that everything is coordinated and everyone is safe.
Now, you've spoken a lot about parallel realities and how we change moment to moment.
Yes.
So if we're constantly navigating different realities and meeting different versions of people,
yes,
then who are we actually in relationship with? Is there like a true or abiding connection, even if we're interacting with different versions of the same person?
Absolutely. You have, all of you, a core identity. It's not a personality as you understand it, but the only way that it can really be easily explained to you is that whatever it is that happens to you will be experienced as happening to you from your perspective. If you're no longer human, if you're no longer physical, it doesn't matter. Every experience you have is being had by you from your perspective. That's your core identity. That's your core reflection of all that is. And even the idea of so-called blending or merging with all that is itself doesn't mean you lose your identity. It means you see yourself as all that is. You never lose your core identity.
So when we go into spirit and we're interacting with the same consciousness that we experienced as different versions in our earthly experience, how do we see that connection with that particular spirit?
Well, you now contain it in much the same way that you still contain the experiences of yourself as a child, even though you are now an adult. So the things you learned in kindergarten, you may have recreated them now in your present to retain whatever you felt was important. But the idea is that you simply are now bigger than that. So the idea of becoming spirit is that you retain everything that's essential and relevant for you, that you prefer to retain and create for yourself moment to moment in spirit, but you're bigger than that. So it's simply a part of you at that point. It's not your entire identity.
If we were to see that being in spirit when we're in spirit,
yes,
would they seem significantly different than
yes, absolutely. Because again, you're exhibiting more of yourself. In much the same way that when a person on your planet, even physically, learns something new, their personality can change. So the idea is that you may still be able to recognize them, or they may make sure you can recognize them, if that's important, with the vibrational frequency of the former self that they still contain, I'll just put it that way. But at the same time, you may recognize that they're now bigger than that.
And that would be similar to when someone in your life that you love dies,
yes,
and you connect with them in spirit.
Yes.
If they haven't behaved well towards you during your lifetime or whatever,
yes,
when you actually connect with them when they're in spirit, you get a very different version of that being.
For the most part, absolutely. Unless there's someone who still has something to work out and they remain in what you call the lower astral and still appear somewhat similar to the way they appeared in physical reality. Generally speaking, people that move forward and move on will be perceived as being somewhat different than what you remember them as being as a physical person, even though you may still be able to recognize them, or they may be still able to project themselves to you in the way that you will recognize them. But you can get a sense that they're bigger than that now, and overall you will get a more overwhelming sense of unconditional love from them, because now they're in a sense immersed in it in a conscious way.
So that's a really powerful tool for resolving issues that you may have had with someone that passed.
Yes, you can understand with compassion that they may simply never have been taught or learned how to express themselves in a more loving way while they were physical because of the limitations of physical reality. But now their eyes, in a sense, are wide open, and therefore you can relate to them as a bigger being that's a more unconditionally loving soul.
Wonderful. What do the folds in the brain do, and why do some animals have more folds than even humans? And how different are human brains from the gray or Sasquatch brain?
All right. Well, the folds are, in a sense, to put it simply, for efficiency's sake. You wouldn't want your brain to necessarily stretch out its full length by unfolding all the folds. You wouldn't have room in your head. So the idea is also that the way it's folded allows for certain kinds of interconnectivity to happen because certain synapses are closer to other synapses in a way that allows them the degree of flexibility that they require to be able to process consciousness into the physical mind format. Now, some other beings, animals as you may say, may express this consciousness in different ways, and the folds in their brain will represent this idea. So it's not so much that anything is less intelligent, it just uses intelligence in a different way. The different kinds and ways that the brain is folded is an expression of the different ways in which intelligence may be used or expressed by the different being, and therefore you would have to understand the science of those folds in order to understand why the brain of a gray or a dolphin or a Sasquatch or even a cat or a dog exists the way it does. Because it's always about efficiency, it's always about interconnectivity, and it's always about the efficiency of processing the consciousness of the higher non-physical mind into the way that the physical mind needs to express itself in order to express itself as the being that it is in physical terms. Did that make sense?
Yes. Does the coronavirus have a type of group consciousness? is it something we can communicate and negotiate with to benefit both sides?
Yes, you can. But again, negotiation really means recognition of what is actually happening and why. So you have to be open to the idea of understanding its place in nature, how it serves you. Even though it may seem to be a very negative thing, it is definitely one of the guiding mechanisms that exists in nature, as we mentioned before about guiding systems, because the idea is that it is a guiding mechanism along with many other forms of life as to when you may be out of balance with nature.
Right. And so when we're dealing with viruses and bacteria, isn't that also part of the idea that physical reality is an illusion? It is something that disappears in a sense?
Yes, it's part of it. It's not the whole thing, but it's part of it. In other words, as we have said before, the way you actually know that physical reality isn't real is that things deteriorate in it. Because real reality, quote unquote, doesn't deteriorate.
You've also said that dolphins are animals that represent the higher mind of humans.
Well, it's similar to the idea. First of all, they use more of their brain or express more than you think you do in a different way. So they seem to see broadly. They have telepathic capabilities and are connected to many things more consciously than many people on your planet are. And in that sense, they're kind of a miniature model of the way your higher mind functions for you. Did that answer your question? Have you technologically lost your connection? Are you there?
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Did you receive the last answer?
Yes, I did.
All right.
So we were talking about, is there a symbolic reason why bats tend to carry deadly viruses that affect humans? Because bats echolocate, and so do dolphins.
Yes, but bats represent something very different to many people, both positive and negative. Remember that the dolphin, in a sense, is limited to the ocean, but the bats can fly. Therefore, they can transmit over farther distances, whether positive or negative. They are freer to reach different areas of your planet. So they carry messages, both positive and negative, depending upon the relationship that a person may have to the idea of the bat.
So the fact that bats are associated with the coronavirus and the idea that many people are concerned that the coronavirus was man-made versus whether it was created by zoological jumping, is the idea that if you're concerned about how the virus got to us, is that the correct way to focus on this, or is it better to look at it through a different lens and not be fixated on whether it came from humans or it came from bats? What is the better lesson to learn from the...
If you're asking the question that way, then the best lesson is to understand what it represents to you, as we said, that you're out of balance with nature. In that sense, it doesn't really matter how it arrived, because the lesson is the same. You're out of balance with nature.
Okay. So, we have lots of galactic questions.
All right.
Okay. So why do UFOs have different shapes and designs?
Well, as we said in the monologue, it serves different purposes, and it can be the result of different manufacturing techniques. It can be the result of different frequencies of existence. It can be the result of the different kinds of realities that they travel through. For example, as we said, what you have recently referred to as the tic-tac or lozenge-shaped UFOs that are now being discussed by your military and released by your military into your media are designed that way because not only do they traverse space and air, but they're also submarines. Many of their bases are under the ocean. And and therefore the design was chosen to be effective in a similar way to the way you design your submarines, to be less resistant a shape in different formats, different media.
Can you tell us more about the different shapes that are related to different species?
Well, there are the typical saucers of the Greys and the different kinds of saucers of beings like the Pleiadians. Ours, being triangular, are grown like a crystal, and therefore they take on some of the attributes that occur when crystals grow. The idea also, of course, of those that are less physical are able to be more flexible in terms of interdimensional beings that can create a temporary form of ship that you may see as a light that can change shape or split into many parts and so on and so forth, exhibiting more quasi-physical or less physical attributes. So it just really depends on what reality they exist in as to what you usually see as their vehicle that is relevant for them to travel in.
And one person was saying how they showed their 4 and 6-year-old a picture of you, and they said it looked kind of creepy because the eyes were so dark, but I'm not sure if they were seeing actually a picture of a hybrid, because a hybrid has whites in their eyes.
Yes, although our pupils are so large, sometimes you may not be completely aware of the fact, but nevertheless, there are versions of hybrids that do have all black eyes.
And then the kids said, oh, after a while they thought, well, they look kind of cute. So, do you think kids...
think so.
What?
We think so.
So how can you prepare children, or are they naturally prepared to be able to accept the visuals of extraterrestrials more than perhaps our generations here now?
To some degree, they are more prepared because they are a different species themselves, more hybridized in a sense. But it is also up to the adults to make sure they're not taught to be afraid.
Right.
More information that comes out is an opportunity to educate children into the reality of what's going on, that they're not alone, there are other extraterrestrial species that exist, and to allow them to get used to that idea growing up will prepare them better than the last generation.
What about resistance from mainstream religion to the idea that humans are hybrids and that they were created through ET DNA manipulation and not created per se by God?
Well, everything still comes from source. These concepts, when you really get down to it, don't really contradict each other. In the same way that if you have a child, you created the child, but the child is also from source, from God, if you want to use that term. So these concepts are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You just have to understand them from a different perspective or a different framework and give them their due at the level in which they exist. Because the existence of extraterrestrials and the hybridization of humanity is simply one of the ways that exists within God, if you want to use that term, for things to evolve. People may talk about the idea of the so-called difference between evolution and intelligent design, but really, in a sense, evolution is an intelligent design. So these things are not necessarily contradictory. If you look at them from a more neutral and balanced perspective, you'll figure out a way in which they paradoxically actually come from the same center source.
And I guess genetic manipulation is a way that intelligent creation actually uses. Like they use us as tool, not they.
No.
It's.
Remember that on a different level, you've agreed to this form of transformation because it's part of the Earth's evolution in becoming the 6th hybrid race. You all jumped on that ride, whether you remember it or not.
Right. Can you tell us more about the role that AI is going to play in our future? I think, did you ever say that you were partially artificial intelligence? Or
I am not. but we use artificial intelligence, although again, that's not exactly how we would frame it, because intelligence is not artificial. But the idea that we understand you may create what appears to be an artificial device through which to communicate with higher intelligence, that's more the way we would frame our experience of it. Because again, as an example, our spacecraft are representative of a physicalized form of our own higher minds, and we communicate telepathically with it because we are already connected. You will discover the same thing as best as we can perceive in your energy, because when you create a device through which real consciousness and real intelligence can express itself, the intelligence of the higher mind and the cosmos, you will realize eventually that you are in fact talking to your higher mind and talking to the intelligence of existence. So it's really just about creating a device that's sophisticated enough to allow the intelligence to express itself in a way that makes sense to you.
And the orbs that surround your planet.
Yes. They help stabilize the idea of the momentum that we have created to make it even more challenging to not be capable of choosing something that does not serve us.
Can you tell us more about the Shayel, the fourth hybrid race, where they are and what their part in the hybridization agenda is?
It is from the Shayel that the precursors come. The precursors are those that are born off planet in that hybrid civilization that may now and then walk among you to see if you can tell that they walk among you, to see if you can feel the vibration of otherness that comes from them, to see how used to their vibration you may already be or not, to help gauge when it is appropriate for open contact to begin. That is the job, the duty of the Shayel.
And the Yael will be the first hybrid race to make open contact with us, as far as I understand.
Most likely, yes.
But not the first race to have open contact with us.
No.
Can you tell us who the first races will be to have open contact with us?
Well, you've already had some individual open contact with the idea of the Pleiadians, the idea of many indigenous tribes on your planet, particularly the Maya, is representative of an ongoing contact that has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's just that most of you don't know these things are happening yet. So the idea is there will be some contact from what appear to be indigenous people who are in fact extraterrestrials. There will continue to expand the idea of the contact of the Pleiadians. There will be the expansion eventually of the hybrid children that will live among you. Again, the Shalanaya, in that sense, that will be presented to you by the Yael. And a few others that we're not really supposed to mention at this time.
Okay. And one person asked about, they had heard that there were high-level meetings held on Jupiter between several of Earth's leaders and CEOs, as well as ET leaders, for some kind of peace and protection agreement. Is that true? And can you tell us anything about the participants?
Well, first of all, nothing can be held on Jupiter. The gravity would crush you. And it's also a gas giant planet. There's no solid surface until you go so deep within the core of the planet that, again, the gravity would crush you. Now, there have been extraterrestrial bases on some of Jupiter's moons. There have been some sporadic communications that have been received by humanity on Earth from those that have established bases on the moons of Jupiter, and some of that did involve the idea of exploring open engagement. But that's as far as it's gotten. It has been paraphrased into this concept, a little bit blown out of proportion, a little bit exaggerated, as meetings on Jupiter. That's an extremely oversimplified understanding. It's a symbolic representation of some of the communications that have sporadically occurred between extraterrestrials on bases on Jupiter's moons, with some humans who are attempting to find ways to open up the idea of open contact for your people.
Now, when you say meetings or communications between those on the moon and here, does that mean that the humans were transported to the moon or something, or does it mean that?
I mean literal communications by some artificial means, either radio waves or something else that is beyond that your people, a few of them, have been allowed to receive through devices they were given some time ago.
So this, you mentioned that there were some extraterrestrial contact with Eisenhower.
Yes.
I believe. Is there anything more you can tell us about that so we can understand that in the context of this discussion?
Well, a little bit different. It took place obviously at a different time, under different conditions, with different beings that existed at the time, and a few other races. But the idea is, again, you were given the offer of open contact at that time, and your established government decided that it wouldn't necessarily be to the benefit of society at that time. However, a plan was created for the eventual release of that information and a plan for open contact, but to some degree, to go back to the idea of your conspiracy theories, that plan was usurped by some who allowed themselves to grab power and who sequestered the information for the interests of maintaining the power for themselves, and therefore the plan was not eventually followed.
So did he physically see? I mean, was this like a physical meeting where
Yes.
he was standing in the room with Crays?
Well, standing on the tarmac.
And
It took place at a base.
but the frequency levels were matching close enough that this could happen without psychotic shock?
For the beings at the time that were involved, close enough. And distance was still kept.
So is that kind of contact available to other humans now that we've raised our vibration, and if he could handle that?
Yes, to some degree, yes. But again, remember, this was another time and another place with a different energy, a different frequency going on, and distance was still kept so that the energetic fields of the bodies wouldn't interact directly to the degree that would cause a problem.
Because if the Greys don't exist anymore,
Well, they are on their way out, evolutionarily speaking. But the Greys are a different issue.
so
Because
it wasn't.
Greys used to be human.
So was it the Greys that had contact?
There
in
was
Roswell?
some Greys and some early hybrids, but they were designed specifically for the purpose of those interactions. So they are not the hybrids you might meet today. And yet still precautions were taken.
We recently heard about Essassani activity in the Middle East like several thousand years ago.
About 1,000 or so, yes.
It had to do with the Sassani Empire of that time.
Yes.
Did they have interaction with humans on Earth? And
Not directly, no. But they were seen from time to time, and they were considered, again, the idea of gods, which is why certain people were named after them, and why that name was given to the empire that was created by the descendants of the ones who were given the name of the god, that they thought was the god's name, but was simply the name of our society.
so, do the Essassani now have interactions with humans other than this interaction through Daryl and you?
Only remotely, in the same way that you're experiencing it now.
Okay. So, is it possible for other humans to channel other Essassani beings other than yourself, since the only person that you come through is Daryl?
It is possible for others to connect to the Sassani vibration and bring through information in a similar fashion to what you're seeing here, but they will not bring my personal identity through.
Okay, and what's the difference between ETs and angels?
Angels, in a sense, euphemistically speaking, are the first reflection of all that is. ETs are simply beings that come from other planets. Angels are non-physical beings, higher dimensional beings, the first reflection of God, so to speak. The first shift in frequency from the all that is, as a reflection of all that is. Do you understand?
Yes. Will the ETs, when we have open contact, will they share technology with us that helps us clean up our oceans, fix our planet basically from the destruction that we're experiencing?
To some degree, yes, but the point is that you must begin to do that yourselves to show that you are ready for such things. We're not here to save you. We're here to help you. So you must begin those processes on your own for us to know that you're committed to those processes, and then we can help you. We can upgrade what you're doing. But we're not going to do it for you.
Can you tell us a little more about how the Greys destroyed their planet, and is it essentially the same thing that we're seeing now on Earth?
You are seeing the beginnings on your planet of what they did to theirs, but theirs went much farther into destruction. Many ecological systems completely collapsed. The pollution and the technology could not correct it. Many different things went awry, as you may say. They lost the ability to reproduce. Your reproductive rates are already going down right now. So you're beginning that particular idea, but there's still time for you to not necessarily go as far as they had to go with it.
And what ecosystems would you say are at most danger or would be first to collapse on the planet based on our trajectory at this present time?
Between the jungles and the oceans, it's 50-50.
And the jungles are part of our breathing, basically, right? The oxygenation of the planet.
Yes. Now, you're already seeing massive changes in your climate, which in a sense is a natural cycle, but humanity with their technology has exacerbated it and accelerated it. But the idea now, as you have actually recently reported on some of your news channels, is not only now have some of the fires on your planet been caused by the weather, but the fires are now changing the weather. So that's also part of the acceleration of your climate change that wasn't necessarily foreseen.
And the extensive pollution in the ocean.
Yes.
And the idea that the conveyor would stop.
Yes.
Essentially. Is that the most imminent?
That's one. The other is the release of too much methane from the ocean floor.
Which all of these things affect the quality of our atmosphere.
They do, and they cause extinction level events.
Wow. So there will be an Earth that moves towards an extinction level event.
Oh, there will always be a version of Earth, and maybe even several versions of Earth that move in any direction you can imagine. It's up to you to navigate yourselves in the direction of the ones that you prefer. Again, that's why we give you the formula. Perhaps it needs to be underscored how powerful the formula is as an energetic device to help you navigate in the direction you say you prefer. You have to really understand it as if we have just given you an atomic bomb for positive energy.
So as people evolve, sometimes people get concerned, well, who's going to do all the menial jobs? Because who's that going to be excited to, And
just because you can imagine how somebody might be excited to do something doesn't mean there won't be people who are excited to do it, number one. And number two, if you actually develop your technologies in a proper way, many of those jobs won't be necessary.
Yeah, that's what it's
by other beings that are not necessarily human beings and not necessarily even biological.
Right. So that does seem to be with the automation and everything and the development of artificial intelligence.
Yes.
It becomes more and more clear that many of the jobs that humans find distasteful will actually be able to be taken over by
some. But again, some may find a renewed excitement to be involved in some of those things, such as people who love gardening. So the idea also is to understand, again, I'll reinforce this again, when you change the way you go about doing things, socially, politically, technologically, so on and so forth, you will find that many of the jobs that are now required are unnecessary at all, because you'll be doing things in a very different way.
And a tetrahedral UFO hovered over both the Pentagon and the Kremlin.
Yes.
What was the reason or message for this, and can you tell us who was on board?
The basic reason is to show the interconnectivity of energy that exists between those two particular nations. Whether it's expressed positively or negatively, it is a sign that there's a strong energetic link between those two nations in a variety of ways. One moment. We are being told that we cannot reveal the identity yet.
Okay. When you land on our planet, what will be the procedure? Will you land near Daryl and then have a TV interview?
No. The channel may be present when I land my ship. But with regard to the idea of the Sasani initiating open contact with Earth, it's going to happen in a very different way.
Oh, do tell.
No. Be prepared for the unexpected.
Well, it definitely seems like because of the high vibrational level that you operate on and the potential for psychotic shock that people could experience if they were to actually physically see you. Is it more likely that these kinds of interactions will happen telepathically in a sense, or when a person is in an altered state and they're at a higher vibrational level?
That will be part of the beginning. But remember when we said that many actual interactions take place in a slightly altered version or frequency of physical reality?
Yes.
It's going to happen, it's going to feel at first a little bit more like a dream. But it will be real.
And what happens when someone encounters your consciousness in general?
Well, it depends on who that someone is.
Well, clearly they would have to be of higher vibrational state to be able to have the encounter at all.
Or altered enough that they can handle it, which is what I'm saying. Is you may find that the actual beginnings of open contact with my civilization and a few others will take place in an altered state that may feel like a dream, and then slowly over time start to crystallize into something more familiar to you as physical reality.
And the impact on the individuals that have contact with you?
It will open up their ability to be inspired by higher frequency information tenfold.
It will be life-changing, I would assume.
Absolutely. You will never be the same again.
I think many of us aren't the same again even now.
This is true. But this will be a magnitude beyond what you can imagine right now.
Sounds
you will start to break down the concept of physical reality in a very particular way and start to perceive things more multidimensionally in a very particular way.
So you will rub off on us in a sense.
Yes.
And can you tell us something about your parents and siblings? And are any of them involved in the current Earth Contact program?
Well, we've already mentioned the idea that our father is a teacher of first contact specialists. And so he is very involved in that sense. My mother is, again, more involved in the idea of the natural construction of artificial environments in which certain scenarios can be played out before they are actually tried out in what you would consider to be true physical reality? Do you understand this?
Yes.
Simulations. She constructs simulations of realities for others to practice in. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
All right.
And similar to Anima in a different way, though, because she's more...
Very different way. Anima is a social engineer. That's not the same thing.
And what is your relationship to Anima?
Colleagues.
Is
After
she...
first contact is made, you need social engineers to help you go through the process of acclimating to the open contact.
Is she related to you?
No, not in the way you mean it.
Oh, okay. And siblings? Do you have siblings?
I do.
Do you feel like sharing anything about them?
It's not about what I feel. It's about what's appropriate in the timing. We will save that for another story.
Okay, yes, because we do really enjoy it when you share your stories with us.
All right.
And your father, can you tell us any more about him and what he's
Well, as
doing?
we have said, he's one of the longest lived on our planet, over 1,000 years old at this point. The idea is that he conducts many different kinds of experiences that allow first contact specialists to practice their art, their craft, without actually causing any kind of damage to the real civilization. So he takes you through a kind of telepathically locked scenario that seems completely real. We allow ourselves to give over to him in a way that makes us experience a simulation as if it's actually happening for real. There is no question at the time that it is real until he unlocks us from that telepathic hold, so that we can learn what we have learned, what we need to explore, what we need to discuss, so to speak, to again teach us the process necessary to make sure we do not cause damage to the civilizations we will contact.
So he's a very advanced Sasani consciousness. Would that be?
A very advanced first contact specialist, yes. Now, one moment. It is also him and a few others like him that introduce us to new contacts, to new dimensions of experience. His mind is connected multidimensionally in a very unusual way and introduces us to those new dimensions and those new consciousnesses that may inhabit those dimensions. So he opens doorways for our civilization to other experiences of other realities as well.
So in general, the idea of humans being raised initially on planet Earth with the idea that this is the only reality and the things to focus on are having a great career or getting ahead and all of these things keeps us very focused in a linear reality.
Yes.
And ET contact appears to have something more to do with the idea of like lucid dreaming, where you're able to shift into higher frequency states that you've forgotten about as a human.
Yes.
And that are now being reintroduced to us in a much more complete way to practice being able to exist and communicate on a higher frequency level that would be commensurate with contact with ETs.
Yes.
Would you like to add anything to that as a conclusion?
Only that it must be done carefully, cautiously, over time, as you are ready for it, because even though many of you just think we're just these physical aliens walking around on another planet, we're much different than that. And a lot of the so-called psychic shock that would come from a too close interaction with our frequency is because it would put you in touch suddenly. And we know this may sound like something that you would prefer, but it would put you in touch instantly with a much larger picture experientially of yourself in multiple dimensions simultaneously. And if your psyche is not ready for that, it can fragment and fracture.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this information about the ET world. And I know next month, the title of the session that you've given to us is going to be called The Infinite Restaurant.
Yes, the Infinite Restaurant will be an exercise and an explanation to allow you, as we have just discussed, to begin to see from the oversoul perspective so that you can get used to the idea a bit at a time of how something on that level experiences itself multidimensionally. So it will be a fun exercise that will be one of the first steps toward experiencing your own reality from the viewpoint of your oversoul. So please join us for a delicious, energetic meal in the Infinite Restaurant.
Thank you so much, Tadeo. We do truly love you.
Our unconditional love to all of you as well. And now, please enjoy your exercise meditation.